Hi, I'm sitting here with a candidate for state representative for the 11th Worcester District, Jason Palitsch, and I'm Donna O'Connor. So we will be talking for about a half hour, and you can get to know Jason a little bit more, or better, because you may have watched him. He's a vice chair of our school committee, and he's been a town meeting member for how many years?
6 years now, I think.
6 years, holy cow. and I have to say, Jason's grown up in Shrewsbury, and he has probably started to walk and started to get involved in town activities. And certainly by the time he was in high school, he was a voice to be reckoned with because he was very active with his party and with town politics. And you basically could know that if you went to an event where there was a political tone to it, you knew Jason was going to be there and he would have a strong opinion. And that has served us well because since he's been on the school committee, he's been an advocate for students and also town residents at the same time. Jason, you've also been a, well, you know it, but you don't. He's been a state senator aide for Senator Moore. So you've been in Boston on Beacon Hill, and I have to say he's served us well because when we had issues in town and I needed to get something done quickly, all I had to do was place a call to Jason and we would get things done. So he's had an awful lot of experience with serving the town of Shrewsbury. And so I'm going to get going with these questions. First of all, he's not just a candidate for Shrewsbury, he's a candidate for Shrewsbury and Westboro precincts 4 and 5.
Right.
And this is an open seat because Representative Beaton has taken a position with the cabinet for our new incoming governor. So it's an exciting time. But we need to know what Jason really stands for and what he represents. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the fact that you were on the Fiscal Study Committee, and what brought you to that committee and how did you contribute?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Donna, for hosting, and thanks for having me here tonight. I was a member of the Fiscal Study Committee that Shrewsbury embarked on in 2013, and the purpose of that was, as you know, as a Finance Committee member, we had a lot of issues making ends meet. And I have to tell you, the Commonwealth, the state, was a big part of that. Shrewsbury has always been a fiscally responsible community. Since I've been on the school committee, one of the things that I have been most proud of is the fact that we're able to deliver a top-notch, top quality education to Shrewsbury students, while at the same time our per pupil expenditures are actually extremely low when compared against other successful districts throughout Massachusetts. That's a trend you see throughout all departments in Shrewsbury, be it the police, be it our fire department, be it our highway department, all across Shrewsbury. We, as a town, really value efficiency. We value government doing what it's supposed to do to serve students, to serve residents, at a cost that is justified and appropriate. And in fact, we often in Shrewsbury do a lot better with our dollars that are being spent. But we undertook last year a fiscal study committee that was comprised of members of the Board of Selectmen, members of the school committee, myself, and my colleague John Samia, and about 20 other residents in town meeting members, and others for the purpose of examining the fiscal situation of the community. And as I run for state representative, which is of course a state office, it's being our voice in the legislature and the general court of the Commonwealth. One of the things that strikes me from the findings of the Fiscal Study Committee last year is just what a great job Shrewsbury does at delivering quality services for a low dollar. And you look at the challenges we face, they're really at the state level. We face unfunded mandates left and right. As a school committee member, I know firsthand what unfunded mandates do to us. My superintendent, Dr. Sawyer, has a very long list of unfunded mandates he's required to comply with, and he and his staff spend hours and hours each day, just complying with requirements, be they reporting data, be they meeting curriculum and educational mandates and other standards. And those mandates drain our resources, be it in terms of money because we're required to spend out of our tax dollars here at the local level to comply with them, or because we're required to spend time. Staff members at Shrewsbury Public Schools and in the town are required to spend time complying with reporting requirements and other things. So one of the things that I learned as a fiscal study committee member in 2013 is Shrewsbury as a community manages its money very, very well, but we still face a lot of challenges, and it largely has to do with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with the state, with what the state requires of us. And it's one of the things that drives me to try to be a strong voice for us as our state representative.
That's very interesting. And you were on the Shrewsbury Education Foundation as a board member?
Yep.
So what was that?
Certainly. So SEF, an organization I'm very proud to be associated with. What SEF does is it's an independent, nonprofit organization. It's not government. It's just a group of folks, myself included, who get together. What we do is each year we raise money for the purpose of giving back to teachers in Shrewsbury Public Schools who want to go above and beyond in providing educational opportunities for students. And we actually do that through a competitive grant program. And so what that means is, and I'm proud to serve actually on that grant selection committee, so each year we open the process so any teacher, and actually not just teachers, but administrative aides, special education teachers, any staff member of Shrewsbury Public Schools, and students as well, are allowed to submit proposals to the Shrewsbury Education Foundation outlining something that they would like to do to benefit Shrewsbury students that goes above and beyond what the curriculum requires, what Shrewsbury Public Schools requires, what the appropriated school department budget pays for. It goes above and beyond all those things in providing an enrichment opportunity to Shrewsbury students. And those proposals each year are evaluated by a grant committee, again, which I serve on for SEF. We look at each of them and we make grant awards. And that's basically charitable dollars that come in to provide kids with opportunities that they wouldn't have inside the appropriated budget. These include things like sometimes it's additional materials for the classroom in the form of books or specialized software. Sometimes it even comes in the form of trips or educational experiences that we can provide students access to that they otherwise wouldn't have. So working with the Shrewsbury Education Foundation is something that I'm really proud to be a part of, because it's a way we tap private resources to help enhance the quality of education that kids get in our school system. And
so you're a Rotarian. What does that mean? What does that mean for people who may not know?
Certainly. So I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Shrewsbury. Very, very proud to be a part of Rotary. I've been with Rotary for about a year now. We meet Monday afternoons. What Rotary does, it's a collection of residents in Shrewsbury, a lot of leaders from both the business and the nonprofit communities. And what we do is we hear speakers and causes from the nonprofit world, folks who are trying to do some charitable good, helping people in need, not just locally, but around the globe. And we pool our resources to try to help those folks. I'm a member in my capacity as an advocate for Veterans Inc., where I work now, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that helps veterans in need. And I actually came to the organization. They had me first as a guest speaker talking about the charitable work that Veterans Inc. does, but was happy to become a member in short order. And actually, Rotary is an international organization. Of course, it has a Shrewsbury chapter. But internationally, Rotary reaches out to help folks in need. Rotary was actually, interestingly enough, the organization that took the greatest strides towards eradicating polio internationally. I believe that there are 2 countries now across the globe where polio still has a presence. Obviously, it was a very major health affliction in the mid to early portion of the 20th century, but actually Rotary International was the agency that raised the funds, got awareness out, got medication out that actually helped eradicate that disease. So there's a local chapter in Shrewsbury that I'm a part of. Very proud to be part of that organization.
So you keep yourself busy. You're also a board member on the Friends of Worcester RSVP. What does the RSVP stand for?
So RSVP stands for Retired and Senior Volunteer Program. It's something I'm really, really excited to be part of. I've been a board member with RSVP, I believe, for about 3 or 4 years now. What RSVP does, and it's a regional organization, it's primarily funded through federal grants. but there's a Worcester-based Central Massachusetts RSVP, and what it does is it connects seniors with volunteer opportunities in the community. So senior citizens and retired persons who are interested, in getting involved in the community, either through helping a charitable organization or oftentimes through going into schools and talking with students. What RSVP does is it connects senior citizens based on their particular skill set, their particular background, their particular abilities, their particular interests, and it gives them a mission in the community. It connects them with an organization that could really benefit from their involvement and their skills. And what Friends of RSVP of Greater Worcester does is we raise funds to support that organization. It is primarily funded, again, through a competitive federal grant, but that grant funding, just doesn't do nearly enough to cover what it is that this program really does and can do. So I'm really proud to be part of the Friends organization there that raises funds in support of that great effort.
And you were a member at one time of the Gala Committee and Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. So it's service, service, service.
Of course, and on that one, of course, each year Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services does an annual gala event that raises funds for the organization, and I'm a former member of that, raising funds in support of the organization. And I'll tell you, my real experience with SYFS, Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, which for those of you who don't know is that small building right on Maple Avenue, right where Old Mill Road intersects with Maple Avenue, that despite the small building really does an incredible amount for families and young people in Shrewsbury. I've primarily seen that as a school committee member over the past few years, as not only have class sizes grown before our operational override, but also as our culture changes and students and young people are under a lot more stress. The mental health challenges faced by students, and not just high school students, but middle and elementary school students as well, have been on the rise quite a bit, and it often exceeds the ability of guidance counselors, teachers, assistant principals, psychiatrists. It often exceeds the ability of very dedicated, very committed professionals in our school system to handle. There's a lot of outside intervention that needs to be involved. We need to get the families involved. In Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, SYFS has been the agency that has really stepped up to do that. So I've always been proud to have anything whatsoever to do with that organization, which again, I'll tell you as a school committee member, has really been a godsend to Shrewsbury students and to a lot of families that are struggling to help a student adjust to a mental health issue, be it stress or something a lot more serious.
So let's go back a little bit. How did growing up in Shrewsbury and attending public schools in Shrewsbury, how did that affect you?
I would say that has affected me as a person and the direction that I've taken in my life probably more than anything. Just by way of background, my parents chose to live in Shrewsbury before I turned 2 years old. I think I was about 18 months old. My mother was from Worcester, but neither of them had been from Shrewsbury, but they chose to live in Shrewsbury as opposed to other communities because of the quality of public education they knew their kids, my sister and I, would receive here in town. And so I've been in Shrewsbury since before I turned 2 years old. I grew up here. Obviously, it was a nice neighborhood. I was privileged to attend Shrewsbury Public Schools K through 12, started with kindergarten at Beale School. Went to Patton School for a few years, and then I had the exciting privilege to attend Floral Street School when it first opened as a third grader. And actually, interestingly, I remember thinking how tall my assistant principal, Dr. Sawyer, was at the time when I was a third grader, and of course now he works for me as our superintendent of schools when I'm on the school committee. But I think back on what it meant to me growing up in Shrewsbury, how that shaped me, how being a student of Shrewsbury Public Schools shaped who I am today and my values. And it's difficult to put into words what a difference that made. First of all, I got a great education that prepared me very well for both college and the workforce. But beyond that, I learned to be an active participant in my community. I learned to give back. I learned at a very young age that was important. I learned about things like personal responsibility. I learned about working with others. I was very fortunate to grow up when I did in Shrewsbury Public Schools. It was a very diverse community that very much reflected the Shrewsbury and the Westboro that we have today. I learned to work with others of different backgrounds and beliefs to work as a team, to be collaborative. So I think of the values of giving back to the community, personal responsibility, working with others, and those more than anything have really driven me throughout life. I've always been a person who's driven by public service, as you mentioned earlier. Been a town meeting member since I was 19 years old. Actually, I worked for a few years for Mike Moore, who's our state senator. I'm on our school committee now. All of that has been driven by a really deep desire that's really in my blood to give back to this community that's given me so much. And it's not just a trait of personality. It really comes from growing up in Shrewsbury. You're a lifelong Shrewsbury resident yourself. You grew up here. I think you were a town meeting member at a fairly young age as well, Donna. You learn growing up here about what the community does for people and about how important it is to give back. And that's just shaped me and my values, I think, more than any other experience I could think of.
Well, it's a scary thought, because as I watched you in high school, okay, I watched you and I thought, how can he be so involved? And I recollected that when I was in high school, I was involved. And I think when you start at a young age, you just can't leave it, because it is a part of your life. And your community is very important, and it's obvious by all of the work that you've done. Now, when you were going to college, you were at the same time working in Boston at Beacon Hill.
That's right. I actually started when Senator Michael Moore, who's the senator for the 2nd Worcester District, a district that, of course, includes Shrewsbury, when he was sworn in, actually, I started working for him right off as a legislative aide. I was eventually promoted to be his communications director, although, of course, with Senator Moore, a promotion doesn't mean different work, it just means additional work. So much of the work that I had already undertaken for his office, I still kept, in addition to obviously handling his communications with the public, his social media, emails, things like that. But what I did when I worked for Senator Moore, I saw firsthand what it took to get something done in the state legislature. Shrewsbury being a part of his district, the senator assigned me as a Shrewsbury resident to a lot of important projects that were both important to him and important to our community that really made a difference in Shrewsbury. And I think back on my 3 years working as an aide in his office, and how it prepared me for the process. And I remember the experience that I gained. And Donna, I know what it takes to get something done on Beacon Hill. And that's important to this role. Members of the state Senate usually have between 3 and 8 members of their staff. A state representative has 1 aide. Much of the work you'll do as an aide to a member of the state Senate, you're actually going to have to do yourself as a state representative, so I'm well prepared for that role. I look back on legislation. My duties included drafting legislation, getting legislation through the committee process, be it very significant or be it something more specific to a particular community, like a home rule petition. Responding to constituent services calls, and what that means is anybody who had an issue, any resident of the senator's district who was having an issue or a hard time with a state agency or a branch of government, who either needed somebody to explain the process to them, or if they were having a tough time and they needed somebody to go to bat for them. That's what the senator's office did. That was work that I did on behalf of Senator Moore for residents of Shrewsbury that I would continue to do as a state rep. I think of some of those issues in particular. I remember legislation that I was particularly involved in on the senator's behalf. One of the first major bill signings he went to as a state legislator. The bill was properly named an act relative to assault on healthcare providers. And one of the first issues that the senator, and he assigned me to this particular task when he was sworn in, there was a crisis, and there still is to some extent, of primarily registered nurses, but also physical therapists and occupational therapists in our healthcare system who are being physically assaulted in the course of doing their jobs. It had long ago been recognized that some EMTs, emergency medical technicians, were being assaulted in the course of responding to emergency medical visits, especially when there was a criminal issue involved. But what hadn't been acknowledged, despite how many times over the past 20 years the bill had been filed in the legislature, was nurses were being assaulted in our hospitals, especially in our emergency rooms. And by and large, it was treated like it was and should be a routine thing. Obviously everybody involved with our nurses, wants to support them in the work that they would do. But, there were a number of hospitals in Massachusetts, including, I believe Brockton was one, where there were more outgoing 911 calls for safety concerns for nurses than there were incoming patients. And people, especially, again, those involved in criminal episodes, were physically assaulting nurses. and it wasn't being handled properly. It was being treated like the nurse should just tolerate that as part of their day-to-day duty. And a number of legislators over the years had filed bills to make that a crime and to increase the criminal penalties once it was a crime for those who had assaulted nurses, but it never got anywhere. And there was something when Senator Moore was sworn in, he said, you know, I want to take this up. There are so many registered nurses. You yourself know as a healthcare professional, Donna, there are so many registered nurses in the area. He decided that was something he wanted to take up. He assigned me to that. And actually, we got that legislation passed that finally increased the criminal penalties against people who assaulted registered nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists. It's the first bill signing that the senator was given a special pen at as he was part of the legislation, first bill signing that I attended. But, you know, that's just one example. There were other things. You know, one of the projects that Senator Moore gave me that had the biggest emotional impact on me was he was a very vocal opponent of Governor Patrick's efforts to close the Glavin Center in Shrewsbury. He very much wanted to keep the Glavin Center open. He assigned me to that task, and for 3 years, and though we were ultimately unsuccessful, you know, working with the families of residents at Glavin, we started with 58 in 2008, and eventually they whittled that down. But meeting with those families on a monthly basis, hearing the concerns of their relatives and loved ones who suffered from severe developmental disabilities as the administration tried to close that facility, I learned a lot from that. First and foremost, I learned that sometimes policy 80,000 feet up in the air doesn't take into account what's best for real people. You know, there was a policy, move people out of what were called institutional settings, move them into group homes. And for the vast majority of persons served by DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, that's the appropriate setting. But there were a lot of families at Glavin who their loved ones had been placed unsuccessfully in that setting. They needed a more intensive level of care. They had a dual diagnosis. That's why Glavin was a great fit for them. You know, I learned that a policy that made sense at a national or state level didn't always make sense for real people. What I also learned was that it's important to be an independent voice and to stand up to people, not just because their party might be the same as yours or, you know, their ideology might be the same as yours. It's always important to stand up for what's right. You know, Governor Patrick, who was, of course, of the same party of Senator Moore and myself, he was the one advocating for closing Glavin. Senator Moore was opposed to it, and I was proud to stand with Senator Moore and fight that. It's not about party. It's not about ideology. It's about making government work for real people. So, you know, I think back on my time working for Senator Moore, not only did it prepare me really well for the role that I'm seeking now, but it taught me a lot of valuable life lessons as well. And it's part of the reason that I am running today to be an independent voice for Shrewsbury and Westboro, to be somebody who always fights to get things done.
Oh, well, that sounds like something I'd like to see happen. Can you talk a little bit about how you can bring job growth to Massachusetts? Are you a miracle worker? Can you get them to come here and you know, set up shop up on South Street?
So first of all, you know, the Commonwealth has undertaken a number of efforts in recent years to try to promote job growth, but what my principal concern is a lot of those efforts don't take into consideration the world west of Route 128. You know, we need to focus on what the skill sets and what the economic indicators in Worcester County and Route 495, the 495 corridor, have to offer. You know, I was very disappointed recently. AstraZeneca, which is a major pharmaceutical presence in Westboro, and actually when I was a young child, my mother actually worked for AstraZeneca, recently announced that they were going to close their plant on Otis Street in Westboro, cost the region about 180 jobs, and it was a direction they had been headed in for a long time. But what really struck me, Donna, was in AstraZeneca's statement to the press. They made a point of saying that they were still very much committed to serving the people of Massachusetts through maintaining their plants and research facilities in Cambridge and Waltham. And it struck me, and this comes from my time having worked in the Senate for Senator Moore, who was chairman of the Community Development and Small Business Committee, how often state efforts to support and bolster economic growth really look to the Boston metropolitan area, really look east of Route 128. And you look at Worcester County, you look at 495, we have such a high-skilled population that is prepared for the growth industries that are coming to Massachusetts, be they in the healthcare industry where you yourself work, be they in the medical sciences and medical devices industry, be in the biotech industry, higher education. You know, these are industries that are growing as economic sectors for Massachusetts, that have a really significant presence in Worcester County in the 495 corridor. You know, what do we need to do as a state to encourage job growth? Well, first and foremost, no new taxes. I am 100% committed to no new taxes, to no tax increases. We need to make sure our business and corporate sectors know that Massachusetts is a safe and secure place to do business, that they're not going to be crippled by the cost of doing business here. And that, of course, goes for residents, too. But number one, I'm committed to no new taxes as a member of the state legislature, and I think that's especially important for our business community that looks at Massachusetts, sees a highly skilled workforce, sees a great customer base, but may see too much regulation, too much financial burden, and we need to fight that as a Commonwealth. But in addition to that, you know, we need to do a lot more specific things. Again, anytime we create a new tax credit, anytime the Commonwealth tries to lay out the carpet to create a financial incentive for either a new company or a new industry to come into Massachusetts, we need to make sure there is incentive for them to first and foremost go west of 128. But I also looked at small businesses as well. The Boston Globe had an interesting editorial the other day, which I fully agree with, talking about how there are so many manufacturing businesses in Massachusetts, and we're not thought of as a big manufacturing state because we don't have the manufacturing that's commonly associated with yesterday, a large plant making or mass producing one particular device. There's a lot of specialized manufacturing in Massachusetts, especially when it comes to the biotech industry, the medical device industry, that make a very specialized product that appeal to a very specialized market. And a lot of those businesses in Massachusetts, you know, Donna, they don't export their products. They don't export their products overseas because they don't want to deal with the regulatory burdens that come into place at the federal level. They don't want to deal with their taxes as a result of having to engage in that type of enterprise. We need to make sure that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts assists small businesses in our manufacturing sector with getting their products to markets overseas, because what we do in Massachusetts is specialized, it's skilled, it's highly needed. We need to make sure that our folks in Massachusetts who are starting businesses, who are making things in our economy, actually have access to the markets overseas, not just here in the United States, that are going to make the most use of those products.
I knew we were going to be running out of time, so this is really going to be probably my last question because we only have about a minute left. Why do you want to run for state rep?
You know, I want to be the state representative for Shrewsbury and Westboro because we need a strong, effective, independent voice on Beacon Hill who can get things done. I look at Shrewsbury and Westboro, and in Shrewsbury I look at not only by being almost lifelong resident, but also by being a school committee member here in town. The crippling burden that unfunded mandates place on both Shrewsbury and Westboro, whether they be in the form of things that our school department is required to do, whether they be in the form of regulatory burdens, whether they be in the form of 40B, which instead of creating affordable housing, a goal that I support, simply override our local zoning laws and create irresponsible projects or enable irresponsible projects that add to our public school and public safety burdens. We need a strong, effective voice who is able to speak for Shrewsbury, who's able to speak for Westboro in a way that gets things done. I have the right combination of experience to be that voice. First and foremost, I have experience on Beacon Hill, as we talked about, my service as an aide to our state senator, Mike Moore. I know what it takes to get things done. I've drafted legislation, I've filed legislation, I've gotten it through the committee process. I know what it means to start out from nowhere and to reach a major legislative achievement. But more importantly than that, I know the local issues like the back of my hand as a school committee member. Nobody needs to tell me about unfunded mandates because my superintendent has an 8 or 9 page list of unfunded mandates he's required to comply with. But in addition to that, there are so many other things that Shrewsbury and Westboro residents need a strong voice for Beacon Hill on supporting public education. We're going to be revising and revisiting the Chapter 70 formula in the next few years. And for those who don't know, the Chapter 70 formula is the mechanism through which the state funds public education. It hasn't been updated significantly since it was first implemented in 1993. It's finally going to be revisited and reviewed. Shrewsbury and Westboro need to have a strong seat at the table to make sure districts like ours, not just urban or struggling districts, are represented. I also oppose lifting the cap on charter schools, because while there are some great charter schools that do some great things for students, lifting the cap and expanding the number of charter schools in the Commonwealth is really only going to hurt Shrewsbury and Westboro public schools financially. We need to have a strong voice at the table for that. As we talked about, I oppose new taxes. Many families in Shrewsbury and Westboro are struggling to keep pace with the slow rate of economic growth, the slow recovery. They can't afford that type of burden now, so I very much want to be a strong voice for these families as we look to the next few years, and that's just some of the reasons why I'm running for state representative.
Well, I hope you've gotten to know Jason a bit better in this half hour, so please consider voting for Jason Palitsch.